De nuevo, muchísimas gracias por haber llenado de nuevo esta sala. Espero que hayáis disfrutado con la charla, el diálogo entre Fernando Sabater y Alejandro Simón Partal. Tenemos aquí al que creo que no hay ninguna duda que será uno de los invitados más relevantes de esta edición, dado que es también uno de los escritores más relevantes de la lengua inglesa del siglo. Es John Banville, el maestro irlandés, que por fin ha podido venir a Málaga también después de un par de intentos fallidos debido a la pandemia, al que quiero agradecer pública y personalmente que haya aceptado nuestra invitación. John, thank you very much for accepting our invitation. It's a true honor to have you here. Le acompaña un amigo de la Térmica, amigo también mío, es Enrique Juncosa, comisario de exposiciones. Ahora mismo se está clausurando en unos días una de las últimas exposiciones que ha comisariado, la última en Málaga, de Miquel Barceló en el Museo Picasso. Él es también un interesantísimo poeta y también le quiero dar las gracias a Enrique por haber aceptado. Ellos se conocen de antes, lo cual juega a favor para este diálogo, que no tengo muy claro de qué van a hablar exactamente, eso lo sabe solamente Enrique, creo que ni siquiera John sabe exactamente el fondo de esta conversación, que espero que disfrutéis, y es un placer para la Térmica tener a John, es un placer, yo creo también un privilegio para este público que lo tengáis cerca, y bueno, espero que disfrutéis. Vamos a darle un aplauso de bienvenida a estos dos grandes escritores. Muchas gracias.
Hola, buenas noches a todos y bienvenidos a la Térmica, y gracias a Chema por la organización. John Banville, voy a hablar en inglés, ¿no? Para que os podamos entender, ¿no? Pero John Banville was born in County Wexford in Ireland in 1945, and he's an acclaimed Irish novelist. And I want to do is talk maybe about a few of your books and then some ideas about literature, no? But his novel, The Book of Evidence, in 1989, which is one of my favorite books of yours, was shortlisted for the Booker Prize and won the Guinness Speed Aviation Award. And after that, a lot of his books, they won very major awards. And so he's quite an established writer, no? This Book of Evidence is just been published in Spanish by Alfaguara in a book with with three novels under the title de La Trilogía de Freddie Montgomery, no? And in this book, I think there's a relation to Nabokov in the sense that there's someone making a confession like in Lolita, no? And it's an author that you've been compared often, no? So is that are you happy with this comparison?
Well, a comparison with Nabokov is always a delight, slightly two-sided delight, of course. Not sure that I like to be compared to anybody. I sprang fully armed from my own head, so I'm not influenced by anybody. But in Lolita, Freddie Montgomery is a killer, he's a murderer. In Lolita, the same is true, but Lolita is very different in that Lolita is about a great love affair. And it's maybe one of the greatest love poems in literature. I'm afraid my book is not about love.
Okay, now in this book and the other two books of the trilogy, that is probably the same character. In the second novel is someone who's been in jail. In the first one, the character is speaking from jail. And it's a third one. And also The Untouchable, there's another of my favorite books of yours, is also about a criminal, in this case a real one, is Anthony Blunt, the spy. And why do you have this vision about the people, the scholars of history of art, that become murderers or spies?
I don't know. I think that I write about what I feel I should write about. I had to write about Freddie Montgomery because there was an Irish murder case
I see.
on which the book is based. And the man who he killed 2 people in Ireland in, I guess, the early 1980s. And he got out of jail about 5 or 6 years ago. And he comes to my readings, and he stands in the back of the hall watching me. And he knows that I've written about him. And I now have lunch frequently at an outdoor restaurant in Dublin. Well, it won't be frequent now that the winter is coming, but during the summer I did. And this man, the double murderer, he walks up the street and walks down the street just to let me know he's there. So I introduced him. I didn't introduce him, but I pointed him out to a friend of mine the other day as my psychopath. And she didn't think it was funny. And perhaps I shouldn't think it's funny either.
Well, I don't
He
think
may
it
get
is.
me. He may get me, yeah. But also, in the book that I've just finished, I've reintroduced him. I've got him out of jail. So when he finds that out, he really will want to kill me, I think.
Is this April in Spain?
No. This is a book I've finished. No point in talking about it because it won't appear for a year or so.
I see. And then you won other awards but you also had a case of someone calling you and telling you that you won the Nobel Prize.
Oh yeah, that was a hoax about 4 or 5 years ago. It was quite funny, really.
But did you believe him?
Well, I did believe him. I mean,
Yeah.
as I've said, I have no experience of being called from the Swedish Academy and told I've won the Nobel Prize, so how could I judge? And he was very persuasive. He read me the citation that they were going to do, and he told me that Margaret Atwood had won, because there were 2 prizes awarded that year. He told me Margaret Atwood had won the other one. I must ask Peggy if he called her as well. But he was very persuasive. And that was 11:20. I was lying face down on my physiotherapist's couch, having my very painful back attended to. My phone rang, and it said Stockholm. I thought, well, this is the day. And I assumed that they were calling me to ask me for comment on whoever had won that year. But this man said, Mr. Banville, this is Mats Malm. I'm Permanent Secretary of the Nobel Prize. I want to tell you won the prize. And went on. And so, that was wonderful. And I phoned everybody. So for 40 minutes, I was a Nobel Prize winner. And then at 12 o'clock, my daughter phoned me and said, Dad, this is live streaming, and it's not you. So I immediately had to phone everybody again. But the punchline of the story is that while I was phoning everybody to tell them it was a hoax, and that I would pay for the champagne that they just opened, he left a message saying, oh, sorry, Mr. Banville, there was a mix-up, but we'll give it to you next year. But they didn't give it to me next year. So anyway, it was funny.
Yeah. Anyway, you published several works in the trilogy form, no? Or they become a trilogy eventually, no? And the first one is a series of books dedicated to scientists, Copernicus and Newton.
Kepler.
And Kepler, no? What did attract you about the scientists? Is this about an idea of literature?
Well, I've always been fascinated by science as a creative process. The more I read about scientists, the more I realized that scientists think in the same way as artists. They have the rigor of mathematics. We haven't got that. We just have the mess of life to deal with. But that creativity springs from the same part of the psyche or the soul or the brain or whatever you want to call it. So I was fascinated by them. But what I was particularly fascinated by reading about Copernicus and Kepler was that they weren't really interested in how the world actually is. What they were interested in is finding a system to account for the phenomena, to account for what we see. They didn't really care whether it was right or not. Kepler developed 3 laws which were extraordinarily important, but he didn't think much of them, because he was fascinated by the notion that, well, I won't even go into what it was, but the geometric theory that he had, and he held it to the end of his life. I like that about, scientists pretend to be cold, calculating, not having any fantasies, but of course they're fantastical creatures, because that's how they do their science. At the end of the 19th century, professors of physics were telling students to go and do something else, because all of physics had been done. There was nothing new to do. And then a lowly clerk in the patent office in Bern, called Albert Einstein, said, wait, there's something I might add here. And of course a whole new science was born. I love that idea. I love the notion of renewing itself. I also love the notion that we will never, ever get to the bottom of the whole thing. We will never know the basics. There's, so many scientists nowadays, they want this thing, which in English it's funny because it's TOE, toe, a theory of everything. I always say they keep stubbing their TOEs against the mysteries of the world. And they think that in their time, they will have a theory of everything. Of course they won't. Or they will have a theory of everything. And then another lowly clerk in another patent office somewhere will say, wait, something wrong with this. So I love that. I love that notion of eternal creativity and getting nearer and nearer to how things actually are, but never getting there. And that's what art does as well. The novelist sets out to make a clear statement about how things are, how the world is, what we are, how we think, how we feel. And you can't do it because human beings we're not rational. We're not like the planets. We can't be tracked. Yeah. But, we keep trying.
The one thing about your books that I'm not sure if it's that I read them well or not, but I found that the sentences are very musical and perfect, but there are very few descriptions or images, and the setting to me, even if sometimes it's very specific, is quite invisible. So it's just about these characters or these ghosts that the descriptions that there are more to characterize the characters than to describe a setting. Do you agree on that?
Oh yes, of course. You see, the trouble with being an Irish writer is that the country is tiny. There's not Southern Ireland is not all that much different to Northern Ireland. All looks pretty much the same. Unlike Spain, we think of northern Spain as Southern Ireland because it's green and it rains a lot. And down here, it's somewhere else. But Ireland is not like that. And also, our great tradition of writers, they have used up the country. I couldn't set a book in Dublin because everybody reading it would say, oh, this is a reference to Joyce, and this is a reference to Beckett, and this is a reference to all those writers. So I have to make it in a world that's not specific. But on the other hand, I have a friend who says, oh, you finished another book. I suppose you've set it in Wexford, have you? And Wexford is a small town in the southeast of Ireland where I was born. And I think it's true. I think that's where I set all my books. But every artist is childish in that way. I was at the Picasso Museum today, and as he said, looking at children's pictures, he said, when I was their age, I could draw like Raphael. It took me a lifetime to learn to draw like them. It's very hard to It's very hard to specify a place. I mean, I could do it quite easily. I could name names, and I could, as Joyce did. Joyce loved writing about Ireland. But you see, Joyce had left Dublin and hated the place and had no intention ever of coming back. So what Joyce was writing about, and what Beckett was writing about, because Beckett is very specific about Dublin as well, they're writing about a Dublin in their minds. They wouldn't have dreamt coming back to the reality of it. I've lived in Dublin all my life, but I'm in internal exile. I'm not really there.
I see. Why are Irish writers so good, you think?
I don't know. We're fascinated by language. I think it has something to do with the fact that we, the Irish, we lost our language in the middle of the 19th century. In the 10 years, the famines, the 1840s, we lost our Irish language. Very beautiful language. Very beautiful, very poetic, very unspecific. You know, there's no way of saying it. There's no word in Irish for no. You can really say it is not so. There's no word for no. And I love that about it. But we gave it up in the space of about 10 years, and we took on English. And we took on basic English, which is like, or was like, the Latin of the Roman Empire. It was a language of command, of brief descriptions, a language of power. And we took it and we subverted it. We invented a new kind of English, which we call Hiberno-English. And I'm sure it doesn't come across into Spanish, but it's a very, very different. I mean, the English that I write in is very different to the English that an English writer writes in. George Orwell said that prose should be a pane of glass that you look through at what is being said, what's being described, the ideas and the images. For us, language is a lens. And lenses distort in wonderful, fascinating ways. And lenses also are beautifully polished. So we took basic English, turned it into a lens, polished it, and looked at the world in a new way. And I think that's the essence of it. I think this is why we had this wonderful new, and if you look at what the Irish did with it, if you look at what George Bernard Shaw, Oscar Wilde, W.B. Yeats, Joyce, Beckett, you know, they did wonders with it. They made this.
Well, Beckett wrote in French, no?
Extraordinary new language, extraordinary new work. Sorry?
No, but Beckett wrote in French as well.
Oh, but you know, French in order to prepare for writing in English. All of Beckett's writing is in English. His French is, I'm told,
yeah.
French, but I'm told his French is very basic. And for instance, in one of the books, there's a marvelous passage where the narrator says, "Morning is the time to hide. They wake up hale and hearty, their tongues hanging out for beauty, order, and justice, baying for their due," which is a canine image, an image of a dog waking up. That's not there in the French at all. So when he came to English, he felt that having done the French, he was then allowed to be freer in English. He would have disagreed violently with this, but I believe this is the case. His English is wonderfully arcane. It's a kind of, it's an English prose style that Jonathan Swift would have recognized. It's a kind of 18th century. And it's all the funnier for that, because, you know, when he says these outrageous things in this ornate 18th century language, it's very, very funny.
Anyway,
and also, I should say before we finish, very few people spot the fact that Beckett is a very great nature poet. His descriptions of the world, the natural world, you know, the animals, is absolutely superb. People sort of pass over this, especially in the novels. He's a great nature poet.
One of your most well-known novels is The Sea. probably because he won the Booker Prize. And it's quite an interesting book about a person who goes to a house sort of to remember some story of his youth. No? And is the sea a metaphor of the memory, in this book?
I don't deal in large metaphors like that. The sea is the sea.
Yeah.
I suppose, if you want to take it that way, it is. But I didn't set out to be metaphorical in that large way. The sea. No, the sea is just the sea. The sea is what the children, and most of the book is about childhood. The narrator says that the past beats inside me like a second heart. So it's about the past and about childhood and about that strange way in which the past is always with us. I sometimes think actually we live in the past. I mean, there is no present. What is the present?
Is this book autobiographical? Is autobiographical?
Oh, no.
No.
Well, all novels are autobiographical, but also all novels are not autobiographical.
I know, in your case I don't think they are, but there is also a novel, I forgot the title now, about a young boy that falls in love with the mother of a friend of his.
Well, I never fell in love with the mother. The mothers that I knew were not fall in lovable with. Of course it's fiction. I mean, fiction is fiction, and life is life. They're two entirely different things. I mean, the strange thing about the novel is that it looks, feels, smells, tastes like life. It's not like life at all. The novel has a beginning, middle, and end. It's shaped. It's this polished object, if it's good. Whereas life is not like that at all. Life is, we have to live it 24 hours a day. It's untidy. It's incoherent. This is why we go to fiction.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't remember our birth. We won't experience our death. All we have is the mess in the middle. But no, it's not like that at all. And yet, in some strange way, novels, if they're good, persuade us that they are, in some way, almost a description of life, even though they're not. You know, Emma Bovary or Leopold Bloom can be more real to you than the person sitting across the breakfast table. And yet they're made of words. They never had an existence.
Was reading now the speech you gave when you won the Fonresori Award and in Italy. And you mentioned a sentence from Frank Kermode, the critic, saying that fiction is about finding a sense of an ending.
Oh, yes. Yes, I mean, well, that's what any work of art is. Any work of art is closed. Life is not closed. As I say, life hasn't got a beginning or an end. Not beginnings or ends that we experience. They're the chaos of the moment. Whereas a work of art is there. It's a picture on the wall. It's a piece of music that you listen to in time. It's a novel or a poem that you read. And that gives us a sense of... I think this is one of the reasons we go to art, to have that sense of an ending, that sense of something that's closed, and that's beautifully closed in the way that life isn't.
Another of your novels that I think the plot is very interesting is The Infinities, in which is complicated the relation of the writer with the characters because other people come in between. And so there's like another fiction on top of the other fiction. No? There appear some Greek gods in the house where some man is dying and his family is assembled to visit him.
Yeah, well, The Infinities is narrated by a god, the god Hermes. But he's a very mundane god. He's mischievous, as the god Hermes is supposed to be. And it's the story of a family. Story of a family. It's about a family, and the head of the family, famous scientist, is dying. And I have a lot of fun with playing, because the scientist is in a coma, he's dying. And I invented an alternative universe where motor cars run on salt water and things like that. It's just, you know, I mean, a lot of art, again, I go back to Picasso today, a lot of art is play. It's serious play, sometimes it's transcendently beautiful play, but it's, in its essence, it is play. And I also think that I think a lot of art gets its momentum and shape from physical love, the rhythms of physical love. See, if you listen to Bach, not Mozart somehow, if you listen to Bach or Brahms, you can hear that sense of physical passion and physicality, the fleshiness of the world. That's what I would like to catch, even if I'm writing from the point of view of a god.
And you also written 2 books that are based on characters from other writers. Mrs. Ormond, that is a continuation of The Portrait of a Lady by Henry James. And also you wrote a book taking Philip Marlowe, the character of Raymond Chandler, to write a thriller, no? Is the Chandler was probably an idea of the family, but The Portrait of a Lady is probably your idea, no?
Yeah, I was commissioned to write the Raymond Chandler one. I enjoyed it immensely, but I can't remember doing it at all. I wrote it over a summer, and I have no memory of doing it. And then when I wrote the sequel to The Portrait of a Lady, Mrs. Osmond, I had the same experience. I was in Chicago for some months, and I wrote a lot of it there. There was nothing else to do. I was living on the campus of the University of Chicago. And I would spend most of my day writing, 8, 10, 12 hours a day writing, which was a delight. But I wasn't there in some strange way. I felt sometimes I would watch my handwriting. I would lean back and I would see it writing. As if it belonged to somebody else. Now, I'm not mystical. I'm not saying I was infused with the spirit of Henry James, not at all. But I think that there is, neuroscientists say that if we have a task to do that is close to what we normally do, but very different as well, that we can induce in ourselves a state of self-hypnosis. And I think I was in a state of self-hypnosis when I wrote those books. It was very, very, very interesting, very amusing. I sometimes felt in Chicago that I could get up and go for a short walk and come back and another paragraph or 2 would be written by that hand that wasn't mine. Again, I say, I'm not being mystical. This is just how we... I mean, look, when people talk to me about fiction and making art and so on, I say, just think about how you dream. Nietzsche said, every man in his dreams is an artist. Every man when he sleeps is an artist. And I think this is true. We invent extraordinary worlds. I never get used to it. You lie down in bed, you close your eyes, you think, oh my God, I'm never going to be able to sleep. And then you're asleep, and then this other world starts up, in which you travel across the seas, you become a pirate, you're president of America, you're Pablo Picasso, you're a child again, you're an animal. I've been dreaming a lot about animals recently. It's pure delight, because I love animals. And I feel finally, coming towards the end of my life, I feel that I'm finding an expression for what I am. I think I really am a dog.
Why is that?
Oh, I think I prefer to be a dog, really. They're much closer to a dog owned by me.
Yeah.
Because I would treat him well, and we would be friends. Yeah, I think I'd like to be a dog.
Okay, in this speech in Florence, you also talk about writing as the ability of being awake and dreaming at the same time.
Yes, I said in that talk, as I remember, that I think it was called Fiction and the Dream. And I said that, you know, you have one of those dreams that we only have 2 or 3 times in our lives, which is so intense, so dramatic, and so personal, and yet utterly mysterious. We feel this dream contains everything we are, and if only we could understand it, you know, get Dr. Freud in to tell us what it means, we would know exactly who we are and what we are. It's impossible, of course. But you get up in the morning and you start telling the person across the breakfast table about this dream, and the first thing the person across the breakfast table does is yawn, because nothing more boring than other people's dreams. But the notion I had was that if the dreamer says to the person across the breakfast table, all right, I'll spend the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years writing this dream, and then I'll give it to you to read. And when you read it, you will have the dream. That seems to me the essence of fiction, that somehow these childish tales that are this childish process of making up stories that I spend my days and weeks and months and years doing, and that somehow when other people read them, and I'm always astonished by this, other people understand and they have the dream. They have the dream that I have. Now, they all make it up for themselves. They all have their own dreams, of course. For every book that's published, every book I publish, there's as many versions of that book as there are people to read it, because every reader remakes the book. It's part of the process. When I finish a book, it's gone from me. It's it's gone walking out into the world to be itself.
You also say in this text, in the lecture, I don't think I can quote exactly by memory, but also that writing is trying to capture something that is escaping, something like that, or disappearing at the same time that you write.
Of course, well, on a very basic level, it's trying to capture life, and life is, we're losing it. You know, as Beckett would have said, he didn't, but he, you know, when the day we're born, we begin to die, and we're losing it all the time. Even as we're glorying in it, we're aware of the fact that we're losing it. And that produces a great sadness, but also a great sense of being alive. I mean, I wrote a little play, radio play years ago, about the meeting between Martin Heidegger and Paul Celan in Heidegger's hut in the mountains. The famous meeting, they met one day. Celan's parents had been killed by the Nazis, and Heidegger was a Nazi. Nobody knows what they talked about. So I wrote a little play giving them a dialogue for the afternoon. And in part of it, Celan says to him, why did you throw your lot in with the Nazis? Why did you go with this cult of death? He said, because death is what gives us life. So death stands beside the midwife and says, give me the child. I will give the child life. Because this is why we're all sitting here in this room, in this beautiful city, why we're able to go to a Pablo Picasso exhibition, because we have consciousness, and consciousness of death. Now, I think animals are conscious. They know that they will die, but they're not obsessed by it the way that we are. And this is what leads to creativity, to love, to all the affects that we have comes from that awareness of the fact that we will die. Hemingway is supposed to have said, how can we live knowing we shall die? A friend of mine said, how can we not live knowing we shall die? I think my friend was closer to the truth of things. Knowing that we'll go, of course, is going to make us... I was talking to a friend of mine the other day. I hadn't seen him for a while, and he'd he had cancer and he's dying. He's not in pain. And we had a wonderful afternoon together because he's quite stoical about it. And I said, what was it like when you got the diagnosis that you had cancer? And he said, I was absolutely terrified. He said, I didn't realize I could be so terrified. But he said, I was walking along that beach, that he lives by the beach. He said, I felt I'd never seen the world so clearly and so vividly. He said, the sky, the sea, the sand, the seabirds, the wind, he said, everything was right. He said, I was so fully alive. And, you know, and I've talked to other people who are dying. They say, yes, every moment is so vivid and so precious. Not recommending that we should all get a mortal disease. Of course, we all have a mortal disease, which is called life. But we haven't been specified as when we shall go. But you know, I hope I'm not rambling too much. I would say it again: the consciousness of death is what gives flavor and savor to life, I think.
Well, besides the Philip Marlowe book, you also are the author of many thrillers that you sign as Benjamin Black. Do you see them very different to your other books?
Oh yes, well I mean I write them very quickly and I
Is the plot more interesting than the style?
Oh yes, I mean the plot and the dialogue and the you know, not that I care about the plot. I mean Raymond Chandler himself said, I really don't care who killed Professor Plum with the lead pipe in the library, you know, in the game Cluedo. And he's right. I don't care about the plot. One of them, I was 3 pages before the end. I still didn't know who it was who'd done the murder. I didn't really care. That's not the point. The point is to show people in extremities where their self-delusions are challenged. You know, we all, if we're lucky enough to live a relatively uneventful life, and I wish you all an uneventful life, but we live in ways lazily. It's a good laziness, but it is lazy. Are these people coming for me? Coming to get me? I thought you were going to say, no, you're in the wrong place, sorry. I like writing the crime books. They're a relaxation. They, of course, like all writing, they're infernally difficult to do. Describing human beings, describing human behavior, trying to describe how people speak to each other is very, very difficult indeed. But it's worthwhile doing. And I'm proud of the Benjamin Black books as works of craft. Banville tries to make art, and don't ask me what that is or what that process is. But it's an entirely different process.
Yeah. And did you ever write poetry, even when you were young?
Did I write what? Poetry?
Yes.
No, I don't think you have the distinction in the Spanish language, but in English, an old friend of mine, an Irish novelist, said, there's verse and there's prose, and then there's poetry. And poetry can happen in either. Poetry can happen in verse or in prose. And poetry is the essence of the thing, it's the thing that moves us all. And that can happen in prose just as easily as in verse. And as my friend said, because he said it happens far more often in prose than it does in verse. So I feel that I'm always trying to write poetry. It's just not in lines.
And do you read poetry as well?
Oh, I couldn't do without poetry. I've always loved it. There seems to be a party going on out there. Shouldn't we all go out and join in?
There's some noise coming from the back.
It sounds like a party.
But anyway, which poets do you like? Is it like Yeats?
Oh, of course. I mean, Yeats is my great hero. I admire Yeats above all. He was foolish, as the English poet W.H. Auden said about him, he was silly like us, and he was. He had no sense of humor whatsoever. But his poetry is utterly great. I take him as one of my heroes and one of my exemplars for his courage. He took a stand. He believed in himself. He believed in the fantastical world that he invented. Every artist should be like that. So yes. And of course I read Keats when I was a teenager.
You quote also Wallace Stephens.
I discovered Wallace Stephens later on. I discovered Wallace Stephens in my 20s. And Wallace Stephens he's so difficult. But he's also, you know, such a wonderful, transcendent poet.
He's my favorite poet in English, I think.
Yeah?
Yeah.
But also, I don't know if the English poet Philip Larkin is known in Spain. He should be. He wrote very simply, seemingly, but very, very great poet. I think one of the great poets of the 20th century. But, you know, not a self-conscious artist. He heard that Robert Lowell said that he liked his books. And he said, "Oh, the Incredible Hulk likes my work, does he?"
Anyway, but he was recognized quite late, Wallace Stephens.
Oh, yeah. No, well, he wasn't really. You see, Stephens spent his life working as an insurance executive in an office wearing a three-piece suit. And there was nothing of the poet about him. But he let his mind wander in fantastical ways. And, I mean, a lot of his poetry is very, very difficult. A lot of it doesn't seem to mean anything except to make a beautiful noise. But then, you know, everybody thinks of T.S. Eliot as being a poet of sense. I always quote, there's a line in one of Eliot's great poems where he talks about garlic and sapphires in the mud clot the bedded axle tree. It's wonderful. Garlic and sapphires and clot, that wonderful word. It doesn't mean a thing. It doesn't mean anything. But it has a beautiful noise.
Yeah.
And although Elizabeth Bishop said of Wallace Stephens that he makes iambic pentameter moo like a cow, you know, and he does. You know. I'm sorry for the interpreter. Please forgive me.
And what are you writing now? Are you preparing a new novel?
Well, I just finished a book in which the character from the Book of Evidence gets out of jail and he wanders into the world of the infinities. I've been writing that for 5 or 6 years. I'm very glad to have that thing off my back and its claws out of my throat. And I'm writing a new Kirk novel, not set in Spain, I'm afraid. And I thought that I had finished writing Banville books. I thought that one was my last, because the last line of this book that I just finished, it says, and here the pen scratches along the line. Pen moves along the line, making its little noise, scratch, 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 scratch. And at the last, impresses a full, infinitely full stop. A full stop seems to me a great place for a writer to stop writing. But a couple of weeks afterwards, I wasn't thinking of anything, but it struck me that when I was young, there was much more darkness than there is now. You know, towns were darker, the night was darker, the sky was much less polluted with light. And I wrote down in my notebook, darknesses. And I thought, oh my God, here we go again. And typical of me to start a book with darkness. So I'll probably do something else, unless I'm struck down.
I'm curious to ask you, it's changing the subject completely, but which do you think is the best British writer from the 20th century?
Oh, I couldn't say that.
No?
I couldn't comment on that. That would be, if the others heard about it, they'd come and get me. You know?
I see. I don't think they're as good as the Irish, though.
Oh, I'm sure you're right, but I couldn't possibly say that.
Yeah.
You can, but I couldn't possibly say.
But anyway, if someone want to make some questions.
You came in with a question, didn't you?
She missed the beginning.
As I always say in these moments, oh, good. You have to ask now, because no point coming to me afterwards and saying, I meant to ask.
Sí.
Yeah.
Yo le traduciré, sí. ¿En español? He's going to ask in Spanish, I will translate, yeah. ¿En español? Sí, sí.
Quisiera preguntarle al señor Banville, ¿por qué muchos de sus personajes principales, los narradores, mejor dicho, los narradores, son poco fiables? Da la impresión de que no puedes creer demasiado nunca al narrador de su historia.
Is that why in your fiction the narrator of the books is a person that you cannot rely on him? That is...
Would you rely on me if I told you my life story?
Le dice que si usted se fiaría de él si le contara su vida.
We live by necessary fictions. You know.
Y de que uno vive a partir de ficciones que son necesarias.
What Wallace Stephens called the supreme fictions.
Stephens lo llama la ficción suprema, ¿no?
A mí me parece una aportación muy interesante de su narrativa, precisamente ese detalle, cómo el narrador no tiene esa fiabilidad a los ojos de los lectores, rompe el pacto entre el narrador y el lector.
Is one of the most interesting aspects of your fiction is this fact that it breaks somehow like a pact between the author and the reader by creating a narrator that is unreliable or untrustful.
Well, I say again that human beings are unreliable. We tell our narratives to the world, and it's all made up. You know, I mean, since we don't know who we are, you know, I have no idea who I am. How can I give an accurate narrative, an accurate version of myself to the world? I make it up as I go along. That's what makes life wonderfully interesting. We make it up all the time. If we were singular, unitary beings, it would be a world of robots. Whereas the wonderful thing about us is that we're, you know, you can live with somebody for 40 years and that person will say something and you start back, you think, I know nothing about this person. I know nothing about this person. And then you can start again. It's wonderful.
Is that what interests you of Anthony Blunt or not?
Well, Anthony Blunt was an English art critic. He also had been a Russian spy. What fascinated me about him was that, well, he was so elegant and he was so cool. Whenever the other Russian spies got into a panic, they would run to him and he would calm them down. And of course, he gave versions of himself to the world. I mean, The Spy has always fascinated me. Late in life, I got to know David Cornwell, John le Carré, a spy novelist, great spy novelist. And we agreed that the spy is an absolutely fascinating creature because, you see, Aristotle said, the man with a secret is the man with power. It's absolutely true. To harbor a great secret throughout a lifetime is to make you powerful. Powerful over your own self and your own sense of destiny. Anthony Blunt, Kim Philby, the other great spies, they live two lives. They live the life of an English gentleman They were all gentlemen, they were all men anyway. But inside they could tell themselves, this may seem like a frivolous life to the people around me, but I have a great secret, which is that I am committed absolutely to an iron dogma, an iron faith. I would love, that must be wonderful. That's why I envy them. The rest of us have to try to be ourselves, which of course we can't, which is what makes us so unhappy most of the time. But the spy never has to be himself. He can always say, but I'm somebody else. This is just an act. And, spies are like, the English actress Judi Dench, she watched a recording of Kim Philby giving a press conference at his house when he'd been accused of being a spy. And he had, 20, 30 journalists in, and he gave this superb performance. And Judi Dench said to any aspiring actor, watch this. This is the greatest piece of acting you'll ever see. And I'm fascinated by actors. I'm fascinated by being able to be all kinds of beings, to be other people. It must be wonderful.
You did some adaptations of Kleist for the theatre.
Yes.
You did several books of his, or several plays.
Several plays. Heinrich von Kleist I regard as one of the very great German artists. He lived at the same time as Goethe. And Goethe put on one of his plays. It's a broken Kug, a broken jug, which is a one-act play. And Goethe cut it into 2 acts. And Kleist was furious. And he said to Goethe, I will tear the laurel wreath from your brow, which I think he did. So Kleist was, I don't know if he's known in Spain at all, but he's very, very great artist. Very strange, very dark, very troubled. Killed himself when he was quite young. He spent about 10 years trying to find someone who would kill herself with him. He finally found a young woman who was dying of breast cancer. And they went out to the Wannsee, and he shot her, and then he shot himself. One of those great romantic Liebestod-Lieds, but very, very great, very great. If you don't know Kleist, you should start by reading his essay on the marionette theatre. It's only about 5 pages long. It's one of the key statements on art and how art is made and what it is. And it's simply, he's talking about how marionettes are graceful because they have no self-consciousness. And he tells a wonderful story about a young Greek dancer, superb, supreme dancer. But he was rehearsing one day, and he had a mirror, polished brass mirror, and he saw himself. And he became self-conscious, couldn't dance anymore. And this is one of the great statements on art. When art becomes self-conscious in that way, it dies. It has to be conscious and unself-conscious at the same time. Very difficult. Anyway, read his essay. He puts it better than I can. It's a very beautiful essay on the marionette theatre by Heinrich von Kleist. Go home and call it up.
Algo parecido a que los escritores escribimos sobre la vida, pero no sabemos lo que es la vida. Me gustaría, si usted está de acuerdo con eso que dijo en este momento,
he remembers an interview.
Y segundo, ¿cómo puede un escritor escribir sobre la vida sin saber lo que es la vida?
Is it that in an interview that he read a while ago, you were saying that writers write about life without knowing what life is. So he wonders how could that be possible?
I wish I knew. I can only say that the imagination is the most powerful and the most precious affect that we have. We can imagine ourselves living on Mars. Think of that. We can imagine ourselves into anything. But also on a more mundane level, we only know and comprehend and sometimes love other people by imagining them into existence. This is one of the themes of my book, the Book of Evidence that Enrique mentioned. A man kills somebody because the person he kills is the one who's never described in the book. Everybody else is described quite meticulously, quite clearly. And the point I was making is that he didn't imagine her into existence. She was just an object in his way. So this is what writers do. Because we're so inadequate, because we don't understand anything about other people or ourselves, well, we understand some things, but we cannot solve the mystery of people. My friend Martin Amis, he wrote a book once, and I always envy him the title, which is Other People, a Mystery. That sums it up for me. Other people are an absolute mystery to me. But then I'm a mystery to myself as well. But maybe it's, I keep using again and again in my work the notion of Pinocchio, the boy, the marionette, the puppet who wants to be a real boy. I think all artists want to be real, but can't be. That's, as you hear from my incoherence in answering you, I don't understand any of this. And probably if I understood it, I would give up doing it.
You talk about puppets, but you also talk about the characters like if they were in a Watteau painting dressed as clowns. There is a similar idea, I think. That the character is someone that you change.
We're all dressed as clowns. I mean, we should be on all fours walking through the forest instead of which we're standing upright, wearing clothes, outfits, the motley. We're all Pagliacci. Getting into these awful cliches. But I say again, as you hear from my incoherence, I don't understand being alive. I don't understand. And I've always said the world seems to me an absolutely extraordinary place. I don't think we were meant for here. The only time in fiction I've ever spoken in my own voice is a very short passage in the Book of Evidence, where the character says, I think our presence here was a cosmic mistake, a cosmic blunder. We were meant for somewhere else entirely. And he speculates about, he says, I wonder how they're getting on, the people who were meant for here, and they're on our planet on the other side of the universe. And he said, no, they would have become extinct years ago. Or how could they have survived gentle earthlings in a world that was made to contain us? And I think it's true. We are so crazed and so ruthless and so violent. And the indifference of nature infuriates us. So we've spent our lives as a species trying to destroy it. And we're getting pretty close to doing it. And it's still this rage of not knowing what we are or who we are or why we're here. This rage to know. And we'll never know. Maybe at the moment of death we will. Maybe at the moment of death we'll say, that's what the whole bloody thing was about. But then it'll be too late.
Yeah. Sí.
Me he quedado asombrada, porque entonces tiene usted una imaginación calenturienta.
It says that she discussed at the university your book, The Sea, and that I had said myself now that I asked you if it was as a book about childhood, it had to do with your childhood, and you said no, and then she said that you have calenturienta, no sé cómo traducirlo. Fire imagination, or something, that you have a wild imagination if you were able to invent all of that.
But we all have, as I said. Think about your dreams. When you sleep, the imagination takes over entirely. Imagination goes mad every night. It says, rubs its hand and says, wow, look, I'm free. I can do anything here. And it does. And if all of us could put a shape on our dreams, we would all be novelists. You know, horrible thought. The world would be full of novels. Everybody would get up every morning and write a bloody novel. There'd be more of them around. Of course, I use my life. Of course, there's a certain autobiographical aspect to everything I write. There has to be. I'm the only person I know I have any knowledge of, small though that knowledge is. And I have to use my own experience. But that experience is transformed by the process of art into something else. It's no longer my story. It's no longer my life. If I use something from my own life directly in fiction, I don't recognize it when it's written. You see what I mean? It becomes something else. It becomes art. It's a very odd business. I don't understand that either. God, I understand so little.
There is a poem of Wallace Stephens that I like a lot that is called Ideas of Order in Key West. And the person who speaks in the poem is hearing this woman who is singing to the sea in the beach, and he thinks he becomes the subject of her song. And I think it's a very beautiful idea of the act of writing and literature.
That poem, The Idea of Order in Key West, of Wallace Stephens, is one of the great statements about the making of art. I mean, first of all, it's a very beautiful and very moving poem, very dramatic poem. But yes, it is. But all of Stephens is about the making of art. It's about how the artist transmutes raw experience into works of art. And the question of how much of life survives in that process. You know, does the work of art cancel the life that it's based on, cancel the experience it's based on, and become something else? I think that's the case. As I said, if I use an experience of my own, it's transformed, transmuted into something else. It's no longer me or my experience. It would be boring. God, it would be so boring if it was just my experience. It has to be made vivid and alive. Alive, I know it's paradoxical, but life has to be deadened by the artist in order to be made alive. Why do we do it? I don't know.
And do you like Proust? No.
I think Proust is a, well, I can recognize that Proust is a great artist, of course, but he just bores me. And I don't like the fact that he pretended not to be a Jew, pretended not to be homosexual. You know, it's all pretense. He shouldn't have called his character Marcel. He shouldn't have pretended it was him. He should have transmuted it into something else. See, me and Proust. But as I say, I recognize he's a great artist, of course.
Okay.
I mean, you can recognize somebody as a great artist and not like them particularly. I mean, there are many great artists. I don't like their work, but I have to admit that they're very great.
And Kafka, you won the Kafka Prize.
Kafka was great beyond criticism. The novels are right; they should have been destroyed, but the
stories,
the short stories, the letters, the diaries, that's where he's at his absolute greatest. I mean, his aphorisms are just, it's a little bit complicated in English, but I was reminded one the other day. He said, I know there is help waiting for me somewhere, and the beaters are driving me towards it. The beaters are, you know, in a hunt. The beaters are beating the birds and so on to go towards the hunters to be shot. So he's talking about death, of course. But it's so beautifully written, and it's so witty as well, you know. So I mean, Kafka was doing a reading once, and he was reading, I think it was the first paragraph of Metamorphosis, and he laughed so much that he had to give up, and they all went off and had a drink. I love that about Kafka, that he seems to us the ultimate gloomy, despairing, but actually very, very funny, and he had a wonderful eye for detail. This is what makes, I mean, that's something about art as well. Art is all about detail.
I think
the Metamorphosis would not be as great as it is if it were not absolutely perfectly detailed. In the same way that Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels is absolutely detailed. He worked out how things would look to a small person with giants, or to a giant person with small people. He worked it out, and he worked and worked and worked. And that working and detail is the essence of art.
I think we have to finish now. Maybe there is time for a question if someone has one. Yeah.
Yo le iba a preguntar algo muy sencillito. Me gustaría saber cómo se lo pasa mejor o se divierte más, como yo o como ella.
She wonders if you have more fun being John or being Benjamin.
Well, fun is well, any of it's fun, but certainly I feel more like a child at play when I'm writing the Benjamin Black crime books. You know, I can make up stories, I can follow the plot, I can do all that stuff. When I'm doing a Banville book, it's just, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm working in deepest darkness. I'm down in a mine somewhere way underground. And, you know, like a miner knocking against the coal face. And I'm knocking in darkness, working with darkness, with dark stone. But with Benjamin, I have fun. Fun.
Anyway, thank you very much, John.
That's a good word to end on, isn't it? Fun.
Thank you very much.
Would you mind signing it?
Yeah, let's go to the VIP area.